These are the three things that you need to know about the downswing in golf. The first one being the horizontal force, and it looks something like this. So the pressure's moving from side to side, and there's not a lot of rotation, just side to side, and the swing might look like this. A lot of lateral movement, utilising that horizontal force. Number two is the rotational force. It's the torque from the ground, and that looks like something like this. So we can see the pressure moving from heel to toe between the feet, and that's rotating that white line, the line of pressure. We can see the rotational force, and a swing using that would look something similar to this. So predominantly working in this plane of motion. Number three is the vertical force, the upward force. So we're pushing down to go up. So people who use this force might look something like this. So you can see on the graph, very high force, pressure moving from the centre of the stance off the balls and toes of the feet. And that might look something like this. Onto the toes. So each of those shots were lacking something. They were lacking the other two forces. And for that reason, it compromised the distance, it compromised the strike, it compromised the control and the power. So we need to find the perfect combination of these three forces in our downswing. And what is the perfect sequence for them? Well, think about any natural action like hitting or throwing, and there's a shift first. There's a lateral force, then there's a rotational force, and then there's a vertical force, and the vertical force can transfer those rotations through the body at speed. This is about force velocity. If you try jumping off your heels, you can jump, but you're not going to get particularly high, and you're not going to move particularly quick. Alternatively, if you go off the balls of the feet, you can tap in to that speed. But without the other two forces, we've only got movement predominantly in this plane of motion. We need the shift and we need the rotation to go with the vertical. So let's talk about number one, the horizontal force. So how do we get this push? We're assuming we've made the backswing. How do we change direction and start the downswing? Well, there's a push. There's a push in that direction, which moves the body in this direction. So what we can do, we can start with our feet together and simply swing back and then take a step to the left. And that is the lateral force. So we want to experience the drill in a way that's representative of how we're going to use it with a golf ball. So we're not thinking of chunks of movement, we're thinking of emotion. And this exercise here, using a step to the left, can help experience that transition with the lateral force. So now we've got a backswing, a shift to the left, and a swing through. And that step is creating that horizontal force and setting up the conditions ready for the next component, which is the rotational force. Number two, the rotational force, which gets a lot of exposure online. We often see people like Dustin Johnson with this huge amount of rotation of the pelvis, the belt buckle's pointing over here, the shoulders are down here, there's a lot of side bend and tilt and getting into almost a contortionist position here, which will put most of us in the A&E department, to be honest. But the aesthetics kind of influence our conceptualization of what he's actually doing and what we should be doing. And we can misinterpret this as this has been rotation, but actually what we're not seeing are actually the huge rotations that Dustin Johnson will be getting from the ground and that contribute to helping him make this full body motion. So we're not looking at particular components of a movement for rotation. We're starting it from the ground and letting the body organise its sequence in the downswing. What we've got to do is make sure that we're recruiting effective forces for the body to use to adapt its form. So it's all about efficiency of motion, utilising all the movement that you've got which starts from the ground. If we're not using the ground and using these components of forces, then we're missing out on these huge contributory forces which have got to be made up for somewhere else in the body, and we're going to start seeing excessive motion somewhere else, potentially putting excessive stress on other parts of the body, and ultimately losing control too, losing awareness of what we're doing. We need to tap into these forces, and number 2 is the rotational force. So this looks something like this through the feet. So now we've got this rotational force, this heel to toe motion, and we've got a force that's moving from heel to toe in the right foot and toe to heel in the left. And you can see what that's already starting to do with my ankles, knees and hips. It's starting to create this rotation through the whole lower body and pelvis. It already starts to look like a downswing. Now we can amplify our awareness of what these forces feel like by either just simulating this movement, similar to walking, or use something like sliders, so furniture sliders, just place them on the floor, a comfortable shoulder width stance, and to explore the downswing rotation, we're going to move the right foot back and the left foot forward. But we're going to do it at speed, and we're also going to let our centre of mass lift. So we're starting in a flexed position, probably moving into a little bit more flexion, ready to use some vertical, and we're going to push the left foot forward and the right foot back. We're not looking for maximum range, it's just a push, a very short, sharp push in both directions, allowing the pelvis to lift, so we're experiencing some centre of mass lift. So this is also combining some vertical element into this. The right foot moving back and the left foot moving forward rotates the body to the right, which doesn't seem to make sense when we're talking about the downswing. But the idea behind the slider system is that when we've actually got the friction of the ground to work with, the direction we were pushing in with the sliders now provides movement in the opposite direction. It's equal and opposites. Now we're actually pushing against the ground, so I would be pushing with my right foot this way, which actually sends me in the opposite direction. So it now creates the rotation in the direction of the target. That's the positive direction to the target. So now we've got a positive torque from the ground. What we also experienced is an element of vertical force. And this is number 3. Using the vertical component, notice what part of the foot you use to push. You're going to be using the balls of the feet, because it's very difficult, as we explained, to get speed and vertical motion off the heels. We need to go off the balls of the feet, like any athletic motion you make. So feeling that jump, and you can see on the plate how much force. You can see it on the graph how much force we can create with that vertical by pushing off the balls of the feet. If we use the heels, we can't get the same magnitude of force at the same speed. So it's all about the velocity of that force. We've got to get that transferred through the system. So what we can do through using those 3 exercises, just experiencing those different planes of motion, we can identify potentially the forces that we're missing out on. Because if we find one of those slightly unusual or difficult to recognise, then we're probably not utilising that in the golf swing. So that may be an area just to focus on. That might be the force that you're missing out on. So it's a horizontal, it's a rotation, and it's a vertical. So if we want to configure all those 3 together, we've got the horizontal, we've got the rotation, and we've got the vertical. So we can combine all those 3 forces with an easy drill, starting with the feet together and the ball just in line with the left foot, because we're going to take a step to the left. Starting here, making a nice easy 3/4 swing, taking the step, then you'll feel the rotation and the vertical. So we're going to do this at a tempo that we recognise, maybe a 50% 3/4 swing. Starting to feel each of those 3. So already with a 3/4 swing, distance is up a little bit, strike was better, ball flight was good, little draw, and it felt to me an effortless motion in respect of my arms. I didn't feel my chest, neck, shoulders, arms getting involved, They were just reacting, along for the ride, just like throwing a ball. Horizontal, rotation, vertical. So these rotations that you'll definitely identify with other swings, like the Dustin Johnson, or even the vertical. You'll see people like the Bryson swing, spinning out. All these things are happening after the event. Bryson's already used his rotation and his vertical. By the time you're seeing these spin, that's just the result of the forces they've been using. So that's a clear indication of the magnitude of the forces that they're using. Now, it'd be nice to be a long drive champion, but we're also wanting control, and so we want to find the perfect blend for us between these three forces. So using an exercise like this will help you explore the combination of those three. You can identify each of those three in isolation, the horizontal, the rotation and the vertical, and you can start to appreciate how much you can tap into those forces and experience not just the use of them, but how much and how quickly you can tap into them too. So what are the timings that you need to find of when you execute these movements? Because it's all individual. Dustin doesn't swing like Bryson, but they both hit it at a phenomenal distance. So you've got to find your way of combining these forces. So on the range, you can practice the 3/4 swing drill, just standing to the right hand side of the ball, feet close together, taking the step and exploring the use of those three forces. And then exploring it with a full swing, with a normal stance. And starting to recognise when you're shifting the pressure to the target, how you're using the feet to rotate, and where you're feeling the push up from the ground, and do you feel the push, do you feel yourself extend, and how you combine those three together. And those are the three components you need in your downswing to tap into that effortless power.